Call to order the special work session for the Town of New Windsor. First and only thing on the agenda, rate analysis for the Town of New Windsor.
Good evening. Nice to meet you all in person rather than virtually, as we did a week ago. Gary had brought up some questions which I had not had time to look at in writing too much other than to glance at them. But what I saw, I thought a lot of them could be answered by going through my actual worksheets that resulted in this, this report that you have before you. And that's not the report, that's the slides from last week. But this is how we got to the report, to show you how some of these numbers came about. And first and foremost, the important thing is, these are not my numbers, these are your numbers, these are your budget numbers. The only thing that I added that wasn't already in your budget numbers is the contingency reserve and the repair and replacement reserve. And that, as always, is at your discretion if you want to take that back out. I put it in as a matter of course, but that's up to you all whether you feel like you're protected enough without that being in there. That will change everything across the board as far as the rates and so forth. But again, I take your numbers, and that's what you see before you as base year. Those are all numbers that I got from Gary and from Kalina. And then I project, nowadays I project 5% inflation. I use a higher percent for some things. As you can see, health and life insurance, I used 15% because that has a nasty habit of going up higher than anything else. But everything else I project out. I project about 10% for gas and some utilities, electric in particular. And that's just what it says, a projection. It's not necessarily for sure what will happen, but it's best guess. On the revenue side, I use 2.5% so as to be more conservative with revenue, to make sure you have enough to cover operations. So these are just some of the worksheets. I don't need to go into detail. I think what you're interested in probably is the bottom line, and that is the total annual system cost. As you can see, personnel costs are $119,976. General overhead, meaning the things that go into running this building, the property and casualty insurance, things that are generally applicable across the board. I put a pro-rata share of that into the water budget. This is the water spreadsheet, by the way. The wastewater sheet will look just like this with different numbers. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just wondering if we have this on our computers.
No, you don't. These are my work papers. I'm only showing you these to explain how we got to the report.
Oh, okay.
This is this is all my calculation, and that results in the report. The report is a summary of all the calculations I've made.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to answer some of Gary's questions about where did this number come from, how did you calculate this, and so forth. So again, I'm just trying to scroll through and show you how things were done. And I do not typically share these with the town because I've had issues in the past where somebody takes my spreadsheets and manipulates them and gives them back to me, and I don't know what in the world's going on. So I basically keep these to myself. That's why I give you the written report. And that's how I come up with the different charts and graphs that are in the report itself. And then we got one of the things that I do. I took your quarterly usage reports. These are copied right out of your spreadsheets for each quarter that Kalina gave me. And I calculate how many people are in each block on the average, each block of usage, to come up with this. The average quarterly billing, the average quarterly usage, and that's how I come up with how many users are in what block on the average. Again, it's the best way I can figure to come up with a typical year, because if you average out the 4 quarterly billings, you're going to have different seasons and different fluctuations in use that go with the seasons. So it's the best way I could come up with a typical quarter so that I could then predict what the bill needs to be. Okay? And I take normally I would say that the base charge should be fixed costs, to cover your fixed costs, which is basically debt service and reserves. In this particular case, that came out to be only $17.29 per EDU. And you're already charging more than that per EDU for your your base charge. So basically what I did was just reslice that pie a little bit. If your costs are this pie, how you recover those costs depends on how it's sliced. You have a bigger slice that's coming out of fixed charge and a smaller slice that's coming out of volumetric charge. So I didn't change the sides of the pie, I just changed how it was sliced. Because I couldn't see a point. I did give you 3 different rate calculations, one with your current base charge, one that was lower than your current base charge, and one that was higher than your current base charge, and figured out what your volumetric rate would have to be to recover all your costs. Okay? So you're currently 137 is your base charge and 435,000 gallons. By my calculation, that resulted in a deficit. So I started with your current base charge, 137, and then figured how high the volumetric charge had to be to reduce that deficit. Okay? That's
Gene, real quick, how, that deficit that you determine on water and sewer, that's the subtraction of what you project as the cost and then the expense?
The cost, yes. The cost and then
the
your current revenue that's coming in based on a conservative estimate.
Okay.
And again, I got them right out of your budget.
Right.
And it projects to be about a $17,000 deficit.
Okay.
Now, that does include that transfer to capital reserves, which you have complete discretion over. If you want to reduce that number, that's your prerogative. I mean, you get right down to it, it's your prerogative to ignore everything I say and do whatever you want to do. I'm just trying to show you how I got to these numbers. But I did do 3 scenarios, one with your present base charge, one with a lower base charge of $125, and one with a higher base charge of $150. And then calculated what the volumetric rate would have to be in order to cover those costs. And then I gave you the different scenarios or different usage levels and what that would mean to people. So again, I'm just trying to show how we got to the report. The report is exactly what it is. That's my result that I'm giving to you. These work papers are how I got there, because there seem to be a lot of questions. Now, the wastewater side will look very much like this. I can toggle to that in just a second.
So I did have a question on the water side, if you wanted me to ask that first. So on the water side, it says that the test year, which I'm assuming is 2024 or 2025.
Well, no, the test year is your
Actual.
Current.
Current budget,
That's
yes.
what we're
Okay.
now.
Yeah. So it says that it's $560,000 on the water side, but our budget actually shows $462 for the current year.
And again, I added in those reserve amounts that I normally add. And if you'll look at the screen, I added in 2.5% repair and replacement reserve of about $9,600. And that's meant to be a cumulative figure each year until you reach a point where you feel like you have enough repair and replacement reserve.
What was that percentage?
2.5%. That's based on a USDA 40-year loan, 2.5% a year. That's where that comes from. And the contingency reserve is 1/8 of the O&M total, non-debt expenditures. And again, 1/8 is 6 weeks. What would happen if you couldn't sell any water? How long could you pay your bills? And that's 6 weeks worth for contingencies. That, unlike the other one, is meant to be, if you don't use it this year, then you've got it for next year. Okay? Because, and again, this is standard recommendations, because what we find with most small systems is that they cover their budget, zero out the budget, it balances, but they don't budget for reserves as part of the rate base. And it's something that is important to do. Now, again, having said that, one of the line item costs, as you can see, is $66,000 transfer to capital reserves. That's your discretion. If you want to reduce that to reduce the deficit and stay where you are, that's your prerogative. My suggestion to you is that that's only good for 1 year.
Right.
Because sooner or later you're going to be in the hole.
So the other question I had though too, well, not only is it the 66 to transfer to capital projects, but there's also 50,000 in our 3Rs fund.
Came out of your budget.
So, correct, but even with that 2.5%, we're still at 473,000. I'm still curious of how we're getting at 560. And then the other issue that I saw on there is that on page 6 of the report, it showed 28,000 for meters, which currently in our budget we have that factored in our personnel, and also we have a line item for meter replacement.
I'm sorry, I don't know what page are you on in the report?
Page 6 on the report.
On the pie chart. That's a spreadsheet there. One of the spreadsheets you sent me was figuring costs, operating costs for that category, isn't it?
It comes straight out of the work papers. That's how the
Yeah.
chart was developed.
Correct. I mean, it's in this work paper. So we have a line item in our budget that already factors it in. So if this is an additional 28,000, it just seems like that's already factored into the overall budget.
I didn't put 28,000 in your budget for anything. I just used the figures I was given. I'm not sure I understand the question.
When you say we budget for meters,
So yeah, we obviously don't have a line item for meter reading and meter replacement costs, but that's part of our total budget. And in our total budget, that resulted in, what was it, 400 and...
Again, what I'm trying to say is I didn't add anything to your budget except those two reserve percentages.
So the reserve percentage of 2.5% and then 1/8 of...
1/8 of the non-debt expenditures, and you don't have any debt.
But see, my question is that we're adding 1/8, but we already factor in reserves already. So it's an additional to the
Then it's your prerogative to
reserve.
take it out if you wish to do so.
Correct.
And I can recalculate the rates accordingly if you wish to do so.
Because I'm just not sure that we actually have a true $17,000 deficit when it seems like the additional reserves we already factor into our budget.
Then take it out and I will recalculate if that's what you want to do.
Gene, I'm sorry. You did say, well, first of all, thanks for doing this because, I mean, it's a pretty extensive report. And I think it's very well done, I will say, after spending the last couple of days like that. But question I had is, you said even if we were to reduce that capital expenditures amount, we would still be in a position where we need to do some kind of, account for future increases. And, you kind of mentioned that we're in a healthy, for my words, a healthy situation on both the water and theoretically on the wastewater
More so
side.
on the water than
the
yes.
wastewater. So it's your view that if we do take that into account this year and we remove the capital expenditures, we should do something else
Yes.
to put us in a better position down the road. I mean,
Well, if you look at the bottom line, even if you take away whatever figures are in dispute, with a very conservative estimate of inflation, if nothing else changes, your costs are going to go up.
Right.
That's axiomatic for any system. So your costs are going to escalate no matter what.
and it looks like we're somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, in this total annual system cost, it looks like we're $687,000 if you project it out the full 5 years.
Right.
So, I don't know, I have a specific question, but it looks like my assessment of this is, it looks like we're ultimately going to have to do something to account for that, even if we take care of this year we settle everything up and we don't have a deficit. At some point, because we don't have additional revenues coming in, we're going to have to do something about it.
If you look at the screen now, this is where I came up with the deficit figure. I took your revenues, subtracted the system cost, and that's what I came up with. Now, again, if you take out any of the reserve figures, which is your discretion to do so, if you take those out, then yes, you could wipe out that $17,000 deficit. How long is that going to last? Probably not past year 2.
Well, so also, what I saw in our current budget for the next year, fiscal year '24, is that we actually are going down from 462,000 to 295,000. Now, that doesn't include capital projects, because that's still a
I
blank
did not
line
look
item.
beyond the test year. I took the test year and
She only
projected
has-
based on
she only has-
inflation.
Which, yeah, correct. I'm not saying that you didn't have that information. That probably wasn't even there when you started this. But knowing that, and even if we put, let's say, $100,000 into the capital projects from that, we're still at $395,000, $400,000. That's still $100,000 less than what is showing here. So the increase, I'm not sure, will continue to happen now. Obviously, things are going to get more expensive, but they're going to drop this year. How long that lasts?
Councilman Hall, you're saying based on the assessment of the fiscal year 2024,
2024 right now has 295,951 on the water side.
water side, okay.
Now, that doesn't include any money for the capital projects.
Right.
It has $100,000 in 3 Rs.
Right.
Let me, I don't think that number sounds right. What
The other thing that
what number are you pulling from?
It was from the last week's spreadsheet. Let me
The
pull
only
it
other
up.
thing I would point out to you is that if there are any capital projects planned or any new debt service planned, then all of this goes out the window. Right now, the water has
It
no
was from
debt.
the last council meeting.
Right.
So, if there are any projects planned, or even in the first 2 years, 3 years, then that makes a difference as well. These are all other things being equal and the best projection I could make. Projecting revenue at half as much as costs.
That's this year, and then that's.
So while they're looking at that, if we increase our efficiency, we've done a great job in collections, and I did see that we're up to 95%. If we increase our efficiency on the water usage by adjusting or replacing the meters, how much of that in the future years kind of becomes a benefit to us against costs?
That's almost impossible to calculate except in generalities. If you're currently at 21.1% non-revenue water.
Right.
If you reduce that to 15%,
Right.
then in theory, you'll have 6.1% more coming in.
Right.
But that's really, in the real world, that's kind of unknowable. And I'm not a good enough cost accountant to come up with an algorithm for that.
Well, I think it goes to the point that, and Councilman Hall, I don't want to speak for you, but I think it goes to the point that Councilman Hall is trying to make, that there's a potential for us to do better than what the projections show, especially if it does work out that we are kind of double figuring for the expenses that you used in your calculations. Not that you took something wrong, it's just that they may be a little bit overstated.
Well, I mean, that's kind of, a projection is just that, a projection.
Sure.
Best educated guess.
Gary, the test year revenue that Gene used, is that based upon all the current EDUs in our new developments?
The information I gave her was from fiscal year '23 budget. That's the only information I had at the time when I was filling out the sheets that she sent.
Okay, my point is then, we may not have revenue projected for all the dwellings that will be on the system, paying into the system in the test year or the following FY '24 on.
If I could just interject something, what I took from Gary was the number of connections, but I based, strictly for the purposes of rate setting, I base EDUs on equivalent meters. So anything larger than your 3/4 inch residential meter becomes 1 point something EDU. So by that calculation, I come up with 270 extra EDUs that are factored into these rate calculations,
But that's not how we bill, though.
Excuse me?
That's not how we bill, and that's not how we get our revenue.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that billing that way per EDU is a more equitable way than saying that one is 2 units and that one's 1 unit. And, you know, again, you don't have to take anything I say at face value if you don't like it. But this is a standard way, and it's also the way that AWWA does it. So trying to calculate strictly, not for capacity's sake, but for the sake of setting rates, that's how I calculate EDUs.
Yeah, so I read that in your report, and I understand how you came up with that. But I was trying to put that in the terms that we bill. So we don't, I'll say penalize anyone who uses more water. We don't charge anybody more if they have a larger water line, right? An EDU is an EDU, and they pay the same base charge across the board. So when you factored all of that in, you came up then with an additional 274 EDUs based upon that. I don't know how far that really is off from our total EDUs that we have right now on the books that are paying that. If we figure in our 2 new developments, the build out of those, the total number of EDUs. Because in actuality, whatever the base rate is that we come up with is times the EDU,
Right.
period.
So
I
what,
would suggest to you, though, that if you have someone who is on a single-family meter, let's say a little old lady living by herself, and her next-door neighbor has a larger meter, like a 2-inch meter or whatever, for whatever reason, then that's a very inequitable charge to her. She's paying the same as the person next door, and that's very inequitable for her.
Well, I guess I don't see that, right? So all the fixed charges that it costs for us, for New Windsor to produce water, before we turn the spigot on, everything that we figured out in your calculations has a cost to it, and every user, every EDU shares in that. So before the little old lady turns her spigot on, or someone's family of 10 turns the spigot on, everybody is paying that same amount of money to produce that water. Where it becomes equitable is the little old lady uses 1,000 gallons a quarter, and the family of 10 uses 15,000 gallons a quarter, and then that volumetric charge is where they pay more than her.
If that were the case, then your fixed charge would be $17.29 rather than $137.
Right, so I had written that down when you said that. That $17.29 a quarter is the fixed charge for water. And so I'm not sure now how we get from $17.29 to $137.
Because water rates anywhere, not just here, water rates tend to evolve over time, period. They just add to whatever they did the last year or the year before, or the previous council or whatever. It happens everywhere. So,
you'd have to go, where we ended up, to answer your question, we ended up at 137 based on the previously adopted 5-year rate schedule. That
Which also
started at
had
X
more
and,
loans in it, too.
That was because
started at X and ended in Y. I mean, I can't tell you where it started when it.
Right, so if we're using Jean's calculations, and she came and she's telling us that $17.29 per EDU pays for all the fixed charges.
which
Right,
in this case, in the water, say case of the water, is just reserves. There is no debt service.
Okay, but then that's not all the fixed charges then,
Well, I
because,
consider it fixed charge for the purposes of the rates.
okay, well, I'm considering we have public works guys, you have a list up there of all those areas that is a fixed charge that the town has to pay that I feel is in the base rate.
the operating expenses.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Before we turn the spigot on, right? Before
You
you,
don't use a
before
drop
you
of
use a
water,
drop of
you're-
water,
You're paying that
we
much.
we have to pay the workers, their insurance, the electricity, all those things should be in the base rate. So obviously, it's more than $17.
I would encourage you to look at an AWWA rate setting manual and see if you still agree. That's all I can say.
Well, look,
Well, why, I mean, educate me.
Well,
Why
for
wouldn't
one
I
thing,
agree with that?
You use electricity, the amount of electricity you use, the amount of chemicals you use, a lot of those things are tied to the volume of production. They're not a fixed charge. They are tied to volume of production. And to a certain extent, even salaries are, because if you get to a certain capacity, you're going to need to add another person. Or if you go below a certain capacity, you might not need that other person. So I use, for the purposes of rate study, and maybe I'm not the best way to do it, I don't know. That's up to you all to decide. But I do know that this is supported by a lot of different textbooks and the methodology that I use. And to me, a fixed charge is debt service and reserves, because that's what you have to pay whether you sell a gallon of water or 1 million gallons of water. You have to pay the debt service and you have to fund the reserves to be a sustainable system.
Lena, how many users do we have, EDUs, if you want?
I,
Is it close to 800?
Hold on, I'll tell you exactly.
yep,
This is the FY '24 calculation, which is based on full build-out.
yep.
We use two different calculations. We use an EDU calculation and we use a user calculation for two different parts of determining the
There
rate.
could be 2 users in one
Hang on a
EDU.
second. One
So-
is based on the base rate, I use EDUs, and the user rate, I use total users.
Say that one more time for me.
But every user pays a base rate, right? If there's 2
Yes.
families in a home, they're getting 2 base rate billed.
Correct.
That's why I
So
said.
you shouldn't be
I use
using EDUs.
There's more EDUs than users.
No.
Yes.
Why?
Yes. 810 EDUs and 736 total users.
But if there's two,
Oh, well, with the school, okay, I get you there. All right,
Well,
but-
and multi,
Well, there's other.
yeah, but I'm saying the school has,
so that's why for when I calculate base rate revenues,
All right.
I use total EDUs, because each EDU is paying a base rate.
right,
Where when I calculate the usage rate, the volumetric rate, I base it on users.
right, okay.
So there's 810 EDUs on the sewer side and 736 users on the sewer side.
what about the water?
The water side is 830 EDUs and 745 users.
And my way came up with 838 EDUs.
838?
Yeah,
You're right there.
how about that?
Gene, I am not questioning the way you do
No,
things
I'm just-
or anything like that. I'm trying to wrap my
I
head,
understand, and I'm not
I'm trying to
trying
wrap
to
my
say-
head around the costs of this. And that's why I'm glad you showed all this, because without having all what went into the base rates, I was struggling trying to figure that
I
out.
actually took that 838 and divided it into your fixed costs, which are $57,000, and they came up with 1729. Now, you're already charging 137, so it didn't make sense to go that low. The volume rate would have to be astronomical. The volume rate would have to be some $22, and that's not feasible. But that's where I start. And then I just start playing with numbers. I take your current base rate and figure out what the volume has to be. I mean, in theory, you can stay at 137 and 435 for this year, and you'll be fine. You won't have as much to transfer to capital reserves, but you'll be fine if that's what you want to do.
And we'll be doing this again next year.
Wastewater system is a little different because you do have debt service there. So you can't shave but so much there. But again, everything that I've done is based on your figures and a projection from your figures. I didn't make anything up.
We're not saying you did. But I think when this was first done in 2010, 2011, I can't speak for the gentleman, but I feel he took our budget and probably more of an estimated budget because we hadn't been operating for a whole year at that time. Actually, from April to July, when we put in the new rates, we went from about $100 to $300 a quarter. And that included, I think, $125 a quarter wastewater treatment plant loan. And then we got that knocked down a couple times. And I just feel he used the entire enterprise budget and divided accordingly. And then in 2018, Ed Jones did it.
Before I started, it was adopted.
Yeah. And Frank was only $5 off on one base rate. So I feel that that was done pretty much the same way.
But, yeah, as I said before, when I came across some of Frank's old files, okay, at least from what I saw, and I can't say this for certain, the level of detail that you see in these sheets that Jean provided me and I provided her based on our budget is 10 or 20 times the level of detail that was put in before.
Oh,
So this is much more accurate and realistic. Are we still missing things? I'm sure we are. Are we still not calculating every single thing? Probably so, but we are calculating it based on those spreadsheets a lot more detailed and better than it was done ever before. I can say that for certainty.
And all I can say is I assure you, these are established methodologies. So, that's all I can tell you. But you have absolute discretion to take out whatever you want. I mean, you could stay where you are. This is wastewater up on the screen now. And your wastewater fixed costs come out to about $41 as a base charge. But your volumetric rate would have to be almost $27. Obviously, that's not feasible. So what I do is I start with that, and then I go to your current scenario, I think is 135 base charge.
Yes.
And $12.85 per 1,000 gallons, or the $12.85 would make up for the deficit. It is very unusual to see a lower base charge for wastewater than it is for for water, excuse me. Usually wastewater costs a multiple of what water costs. And in this case, I forget the actual figure, but I think it's like 2.5 times, 2.3 times or something, what your water costs. I just finished doing another rate study for the town of Snow Hill, and I keep toggling back and forth in my mind. I'm not sure which one I'm seeing. So then I gave you another option to increase it to $140 base charge and $12.10. You could actually come down on the volume rate. $150 base charge, you could come down even farther on the volume rate, so that some of your users would actually have very little difference. I thought some of them would be saving money.
Not on the sewer. It would be less of an increase with the third option.
Yeah.
Third
So
scenario.
again, it's your prerogative to do whatever, but you could wipe out that deficit by reducing the amount again of where is it? 95,000 transfer to capital reserves, if that's what you choose to do. Or you could take out my reserve figures if that's what you choose to do. I can recalculate the rates accordingly if you like, or certainly Gary's got his spreadsheet set up, he can do it.
Hey, Gene, it's Wayne, the Director of Public Works. I just have a quick question. So in your report that you gave the last work session, you mentioned replacing meters about every 10 years. I can tell you that we have probably at least 300 to 350 meters that are 25 years old or older. And with that in mind, let's say there was a 10% deficiency with each one of those meters, and that we could capture $50 a quarter, 4 quarters in a year, times 350 meters. That would be $70,000 worth of annual revenue captured just by meter replacement. Now, what that doesn't account for is the cost of the meter itself, and then, of course, our wages to replace the meters. But that just just me briefly running numbers here. That looks to be some money that we could capture back. Would that help us with our deficit?
That is one of the recommendations that you capture. That certainly would be the largest part of it. And that would, I can't tell you exact numbers, whether it would wipe out the projected deficit, but it certainly would make a big dent in it.
Well, in page 4, it does say that it would recover 20,000 in lost water and 40 in lost wastewater. That's 60,000. I mean, Wayne said 70 is right around the same spot.
And of course, you know, because your wastewater is based on metered water usage, it recovers some of that cost in wastewater as well.
Well, how much do meters cost? I mean,
The 3/4-inch meters are $197 a piece, and 1-inch meters are around $235 a piece.
Right.
so that wipes out the entire amount of money we just recaptured.
And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be ambitious and replace about 100 meters a year.
Yes, for 1 year.
Correct.
Yes.
And so it's my thoughts. It's my thoughts, and this is just me speaking out loud here. It's my thought that basically we can start a meter replacement cycle and capture some of the water and sewer revenue back, potentially without having to raise rates, potentially. That's, based on staff costs, availability, because supply shortages are still looming out there on us. I was able to, capture some meters for the water line project. That's 78, and that's something else. Those are already paid for. So we have 78 meters that will be replaced on the water line project. So we're going to capture the deficiencies there on 78. And then we have another plan for this next fiscal year. So that's 178 meters and potentially a year and a half to 2 years. So that's around half of what we need to do.
Hey, Wayne, this is Kevin.
Yes.
Just to think we could do that within a year's time, like potentially with a subcontractor assisting us with replacing these meters, because I'm right there with you. I'm like, we got to get to a point of efficiency anyway. If we take the hit in the first year to try to get to that, to achieve that level of efficiency, is that something that we could probably do in a year? And as well as adjusting the capital expenditures number, maybe because that number you use, Gary, is like a balancing number, right? So, to try to get right in this coming year, and then progress in a positive way in 2025, can we do that in that year? Well,
that is based on staffing limitations, supply limitations. Town manager and I recently talked about this. I think it was yesterday, and we were trying to come up with a game plan. And it's an ambitious goal to have Public Works, with our other responsibilities, replace 100 meters a year anyway. And town manager Di and I had figured out how many that would be a week or whatever. And I can't recall that number. We'll have to put something together so you guys can look at it. But just running the numbers briefly, it looked like if we had a contractor running in parallel with Public Works to replace meters and and we could get the meters, potentially it would take probably a year and a half to 2 years to capture that money back, because the overall expense of everything. So it's more or less like a planning tool. That's why we kind of did the 100 a year, right? But the 78 for the water line project, they were already planned to be replaced. So that's really given us a better position to start from.
So that's where I also go back to the budget though. In fiscal year 24, the sewer side is projected to go down from 682,000 to 3,000 now. Again, that's not factoring in the capital reserves. So add 100,000 to that, that's 663,000. Even if we paid off the, I think it said in the report, $75,000 worth of loans, that still puts us in a healthy projection for the next foreseeable future, next couple of years at least. So I think the efficiencies is definitely needed, but I think also, I'm not saying cut out our reserves. I think we could still have a healthy reserve with our current rates.
You're saying not to completely decimate the reserves.
I'm not.
You're saying not
even with
touch it
these
at all?
numbers, I'm saying we can increase it. Because last year we had 50,000 in reserves. In our current budget, we had we went from 50,000 in the 3 Rs to 100,000 in the 3 Rs. So that's 50,000 added right there. We could even add additional to the capital line item, and still be healthy.
And that's true in many cases. But one of the things to consider is unexpected expenses that would take away from the capital reserve. For instance, a couple of the water main breaks that we had where we had to install insert valves, they were $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. Now, with that being said, they were also on the Main and High Street water line that we're getting ready to replace. But Town Manager Dye and I and Town Clerk Mangus, we talked about the 3 Rs and keeping a healthy cushion in there for water main breaks. But, you know, potentially we wouldn't need that much money in there in the future if we're replacing, you know, our most problematic line. However, there's some other aging infrastructure that we'll have to address sometime later on down the road. And so basically it would be just like reallocating the money for other bigger projects.
And that's why I think it was a smart move moving from 50,000 in the 3 Rs to 100,000, because right at that cusp of whatever we put in it, we spend. So I think adding that 50,000 is going to help. I mean, that's, you know, hoping that nothing breaks in the next year. But we know that that's not always a realistic possibility.
We also know we have many water and sewer projects that we have to tackle in the next few years. And every one of those could potentially be a loan situation.
Yep.
And a loan situation means we have to raise the base rate to cover that loan. And I'm struggling to wrap my head around the fact that for the last several years, we've been pretty consistent. Right? We haven't gone in a deficit situation with the current rates and the amount of EDUs we had. And we had this big influx of EDUs in the last year. And it looks like, and so we have a big increase in users that they're going to be paying base rate, and they're going to be paying the current water usage charge, and we're still like in a deficit situation.
Plus,
And I'm really
you guys
struggling to get
eliminated $100,000 annual loans,
Right, we did take away several loans.
$105,000 less, so.
So I'm really struggling
And that money was supposed to go into the reserve.
how we are there.
What he said.
So it comes down to the operating cost and the cost of everything to operate. Yeah, sure, your users went up and your revenues went up, but so do your cost. The cost of everything has gone up. It continues to go up. It'll go up every year. It does, I know it does, I know you all were gonna struggle with that fact that you're just talking about, that we've added this new subdivision on, and, you know, we did reap the benefits of all the area connection charges, which was great. We overshot that projection quite tremendously last season, but we knew that was gonna end. But what continues is, again, the base rates and the user rates, and then on the general side, the tax dollars from those properties. But
from this study, I mean, just using the 23 budget of 462 is what we budgeted, and 560 is what the report says. That's a 22% increase in what our budget is saying the cost is, and what the report is saying the cost is. So I get there's inflation, but 22% is hard for me to believe.
Do we add, I mean, one person is gonna make a big difference, but I mean, did we add additional employees that would have taken that number up a little bit?
Are you saying in the study, does it have additional employees? I don't believe so.
not in the
Yeah, well, it came straight from the budget, but I mean, I'm just trying to.
Be from the past year?
Yeah, from last year.
We added the fourth public
Fourth-
works position.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not talking $200,000.
Divided by
And
800
it's a
people.
percentage that is charged to the
Split
water
by-
side.
Right.
It's not even the whole
Percentage
thing.
general
Right.
fund, enterprise
Right.
fund. But it also, that employee also is its salary, its insurance.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're still.
Other
yeah.
variables there. Again, it's not $200,000, but that's just one thing, one line item that is an increase. I don't know. I don't know. That's why we have Gene experts doing this stuff. This is beyond my capability of setting the rates. I'm being flat out honest with you.
I think a lot of the hard part to grasp too is remember initially when the rates did go up, the whole basis of that was the loans. And now that the loans are gone, yes, prices increase, but it's hard to sit there and say we need to increase it more. And then when we do these projects, we're also going to need to increase it more again. When we don't, I don't see in the budget us having any financial issues with having these deficits or anything like that.
You think it's more theoretical than it is actual?
I think a lot of it was additional savings put in there when we already like.
Okay.
I think we're in a better position than a lot of towns because we put those line items in
Sure.
of reserves and capital projects. And then when they're added again, it inflates it.
Let me get your opinion on. Let's assume, just for conversation purposes, we hold things the current rates for this first fiscal year. Of the three options or scenarios that Gene provided, where are you all with which way to go in the event of an increase? Whether are you a base rate increase or a usage rate increase? Where do you stand on those scenarios?
I'll say personally, I believe that people should have less of a base rate and more of a usage rate. I think you should be paying for the water that you use. If you use more, you pay more. If you use less, you pay less.
Anybody else?
I agree with that.
So I agree with that as well, and I think somewhere in Gene's report, it talks about the volumetric charges, and that leads people to save water, right, and be more cautious of what they use, which then lowers the revenue, right? Is the fear in that, you know? However, I totally agree with you, Will, that people should be paying for what they use, and hence the struggle I was having to see where the cost should be that people pay for what they use. And I heard what Jean said when I challenged it last time about the fixed costs, and she talked about people using more water. It actually costs more money to produce more water. And so I hear that, and I'm not sure that we want to try to do something as aggressive as a sliding scale and, all that kind of stuff, because,
Small staff.
right.
Exactly.
However, I long story short, I do agree with Will that I believe that I would rather see the base charge not be increased and the water usage charge, you pay for more what you use.
If you have any doubts at all, you may want to commission a full-fledged cost of service study. Someone who is proficient in cost accounting can tell you exactly what portion of fire protection is allocable to residential customers and what portion of emergency peak use is, right down to the nth degree in terms of all of your costs and what is allocable to each class of customer. That is not something I'm equipped to do. But if you have any doubt about the cost of providing this service, the cost of service study might be what you would want to do. It will cost you upwards of $20,000.
And what's that study called again?
Cost of service study.
Cost of service.
And more than what you had done before, more than what I've done. It would be something that an engineer and a cost accountant would have to do.
Are there grants available for that?
But they look at,
Yeah, really.
they look at everything from the peak hour to the peak day and the costs that are allocable to all your customers, as well as the capital costs. So if there's any, if there's any doubt, I would suggest to you, but it's going to cost you.
So real quick, I just want to say one thing. Some of our commercial locations that have larger meters, their only service is water. There's no sewer, and so if we had to replace a line going to those folks that just have water, if we had to replace a meter, if we had to replace any kind of distribution system part, the cost would be very significant. And the amount of money that's generated through just water alone, because they're not on sewer, it would take years to capture that revenue back. And so a kind of sliding scale would help us capture revenue from some of those high water users that we wouldn't, capture because they're not on sewer. And it would shrink that deficit gap for us. And if we had to make extensive repairs in that particular section, we would have money for that. And it wouldn't take 5, 6, 7 years to capture that money back.
Wayne, can you give me an example of who one of these users is?
So at Tibbetts Lane, there are several users out there. And so Tibbetts Lane, we did a sewer study years ago, and we never ran sewer there. However, for instance, Universal Forest Products, they have a 8-inch meter. The meter itself would cost the town, just for the meter itself, would be around $12,000 for the meter. Because they're not really an extremely high user of water, it would take us, let's say, 5 years to pay off that meter because they're not on sewer. And that's just an estimate.
But I don't think you can just look at going forward. I mean, they've been paying for water and sewer for 25 years or better, I guess, maybe longer than that. Plus, they also
It's just water.
excuse me, they also pay for fire protection, right?
That was my question, Wayne. If they're not that big of a water user, why do they have an 8-inch meter?
Sprinkler.
It's a sprinkler. It's a sprinkler system. Sprinkler fees is what they pay for, and that's an additional cost. But
Sorry.
that's if if that system is used, then they would use more.
That's part of the premise behind using equivalent meter size to develop EDUs, because the larger meters cost more.
So, but you're saying they pay, that's that $4,000 saw added in the revenue, so they're paying that,
Or
one of them, so people pay that yearly into the system. So then, in actuality, it wouldn't take 7 years to pay their meter back, because they're paying this $4,000 a year, then how many,
And using nothing.
and using nothing.
Well, that's basically like more or less an impact fee, that if that system were to go off, it would essentially pull a significant amount of water from our towers. We would have to replenish that water. There would be associated costs with that. That's kind of I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly.
No,
on that or
I
not.
understand what you're saying, but they'd also be hit with the volumetric charge.
Well,
for the
that's my
water.
next question. Has there ever been a fire of any significance where sprinklers went off and you billed them for that water to put that fire out? I don't think you're gonna do that.
No, and one other
County-
thing that I'd like to add. So I
Never
had
happened.
Brian Avery from LB Water when I was checking into commercial meter upgrades, and that meter is 40+ years old. 40+ years old. And so it's not a low flow meter. That means that potentially when they're washing their hands at a sink, or if they have low flow toilets, we're not capturing that revenue. It's lost.
And if your meters, most of your meters are 25 years old, that's probably the case. Going to under
That's
register,
correct.
number one, and number two, they're only going to trip when they reach a larger volume. So you're losing money there as well. Replacing your 25-year-old meters will pay for itself in pretty short order, I would imagine.
Wayne,
Correct.
do you know the sprinkler, the piping size inside there, by any chance? Inside that?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the drawings. We have some older drawings. I'm not sure if it shows any of that information or not. So we'd have to look into that. But see, that's part of something that we could look into. Again, commercial meter replacement.
Right.
There's others that are more significant, but I don't want to name names or anything like that. But I can assure you that we could capture a great amount of revenue from commercial meter replacement and other areas other than that.
The reason I ask that is because whatever the sprinkler is in the building, that would be the minimum. If it's 6-inch or 4-inch, you could go down to a 4 or 6-inch meter. I would be very surprised if the sprinkler system in that building or any building around here is 8-inch piping.
No.
That's what our main systems are.
Real quick, there's a reason for the size of that piping at the beginning of UFP. And the UFP has 2 on-site fire hydrants. So they go from 8-inch line to 6-inch. So there's a feeder line. And that's why that's why we couldn't downsize the meter. It's how it's set up. So it's for fire.
So to answer your question, Gary, I would say I'm more in favor of making it a usage increase, but I strongly suggest that we get our efficiency to a point where we can start assessing, or number one, accounting for the water that's being used. I think right now it's at a point, right, where we don't really know I don't know that we have a great handle, no fault of anybody's, but a great handle on what we could be capturing because of the.
So I will say that Director Myers has done phenomenal work. I remember when I first was looking into it, we didn't really have a good estimate of what we're pumping versus what we're actually billing.
Yeah.
And Director Myers went through and he put a lot of meters throughout the town, a lot of improvements every month we talk about. But one of the things was to meter the water from the well out to what we're actually seeing in town. And so surprisingly, that was actually pretty much the same number.
Right.
So I thought we were gonna be losing a lot to just that old pipe.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty good number that we're pumping. So he has been doing a lot of those, and that's, I think, what's really getting to that point of where you can see where the bubbles of the older meters and stuff that he wants to do first and prioritize a lot of them. And I think he's got a game plan all ready to go. It's just a matter of time and
Yeah,
supplies.
let me restate it. I mean, Wayne, please don't take offense. I didn't mean that you weren't doing anything about it. I meant that I think some better efficiencies that we can achieve if we adjust these meters.
You can't quantify
Right.
what you don't know.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Something,
350 meters at 25-plus years is a lot of lost revenue.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
And before we start hitting folks with, I just don't think, we start hitting them with increases. I feel like we got to get our house in order. That's
think-
just how I see
I think
it.
78 people are gonna get increases because, me being one of them, because I've got an old meter, I think
Right.
when everybody gets a meter that's
That is-
actually reading how much water they're using,
That's-
we might all get, those of us who are getting them might get bigger bills right away.
Right.
True
Yeah,
statement.
yeah,
And again, that really does go
Yeah.
down to you're getting billed for what you're using.
yeah, which I'm fine with.
And right now that usage is pretty low.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between using 1,000 gallons and 5,000 gallons is dollars.
Right, it is, it's not significant.
Sharon, where are you with the opinion on base rates or usage rates that,
I like that scenario 3, but I do have a question. I mean, I have to say, I'm not a big numbers person, but I've listened to everything you're saying, I'm trying to take it all in. But I am really stuck on the fact that the base rate that you calculated for us was $17.29 per quarter, and we are charging $137 for the base rate.
But if you
That's
look
not
at-
included.
If you look at the volumetric rate that goes along with that option, $17 and some cents as a base rate would make your rate per 1,000 gallons be over $20 to make up what your costs are. So even though your base rate is not necessarily based on the actual fixed costs, you are recovering some of your cost of operations through that base rate. So if you bring the base rate down, then the volumetric charge has to go up for you to have enough revenue. So if the base rate goes up, then you can bring that volumetric charge down.
And so that's what you've done in the chart.
Yes.
Okay.
I just figured $17 was simply not feasible.
Right.
And neither was
So-
20-some dollars 1,000 gallons. It was not feasible.
so Sharon, back to my question, you said you prefer scenario 3?
Right, well, it said here,
Increase.
scenario 3 would yield no change in the quarterly billing for 10,000 gallon users, about 65% of our customers.
But that's scenario 3 is an increase of the base rate to 150 and a reduction of the usage rate.
But I thought overall it would kind of.
Overall, based on the projection for the bulk of the users, that is the net impact, but I'm just trying to get a feel for.
That's not your question was in general, that was what
That's
I
what-
understood your not to pick a scenario, but theoretically, what do we each think? Would we rather increase the base rate or to make up for users or usage, or would we rather base, bills on usage? That's what I
Right.
heard you say.
Well, if we go in that way, I mean, I would rather keep the base rate at what it is and then pay for what our usage is on top of that. I was just kind of I was looking through this.
Yeah, but
Since we got it.
the question though was, if we had to increase, would you rather increase the base rate or the usage rate?
Volumetric rate.
That's what he's trying to understand.
Just-
Is what your opinion
And it
is.
seems like you're all on the same page with
Usage.
keeping the base rate
Base rate
down
the same.
and increasing the usage rate.
But I would also like to get a clearer idea of usage, and I understand this is $20,000, but if we can find a grant or something to help us do that, because I feel like we're not calculating usage or the base rate the way we should be, because I never thought about that. If there's one person in a house, their percentage of the chemicals isn't the same as 10 people in a house, or,
That's what your volumetric.
right,
charge.
exactly, yeah.
But if I can call your attention just to that, that's not your cost. That's just to illustrate, and on page, I think it's page 3 of the report. If you look at your costs as a pie, you can recover your cost. One slice can be from the base rate, one slice can be, you won't find it in the slides. Another slice can be from the volumetric charge. But if you increase the volumetric charge, you can, yes, you can bring, I mean, if you increase the base rate, you can bring your volumetric charge down. But if you try to bring the base rate down, then you've got to jack up the volumetric charge because the size of the pie doesn't change.
Right.
And that's what those two graphs kind of illustrate. You can get it from one place or the other, but you got to get it from somewhere.
Now, did you calculate, without going through every page, I can't remember, but did you calculate if you keep the base rate the same and increase the usage, you're going to lose a little bit of revenue
Possibly, yes.
due to the fact that people are going to watch exactly what they use? Because in the very beginning, our average was about 15,000 gallons a quarter. And then once people got hit with the bills, it went down to 12.5 for a couple years, and then now it's down to about 10. So I think you'll see a decrease in the revenue base. I mean, you're going to increase it, but I think you're going to decrease the usage.
That very often happens, but what typically happens is people realize that, as you say, the difference between 1,000 gallons and 2,000 gallons is
Right.
an hour and a half or whatever, but they're, they gradually kind of creep back up to roughly where they were. But your average, it seems to me 80, I want to say 75 or 80% of your users were 13,000 gallons or less. If I remember.
83%.
Okay. So, I just wanted to point out the difference, because if you bring one up, you got to bring the other one down, and vice versa, is what it amounts to.
I guess the immediate question that I guess Gary's going to be asking is for the budget. I know the last item was for this fiscal year's budget, and we were kind of waiting on this study to kind of decide how we want to proceed.
The revenues that are in the budget right now are based on the current FY23 base rate and user rates calculated out to those user in the current, projected EDUs and user rates, which is max build out. That's what's in the budget right now.
Keeping everything the same.
Yeah, for now. Do you know anybody or recommend anybody that can do this cost of survey study?
Not off the top of my head, no. I know it takes an engineer, and it takes somebody with cost accounting experience.
Yeah, I can check with our town engineer if they know anybody.
But you don't want just another full cost recovery study like what I've done. You're wasting your money.
Right.
I think the group where Ed Jones was,
Huh?
I think the group down in southern Maryland,
And so,
MML might be able to recommend
they
something.
do basically what I do.
I think they did the same thing, same kind of study.
The difference is they charge for it and I don't.
well, they didn't last time, but
So would they be able to do that and then us still meet our deadlines for the budget? No.
No way.
So we're talking sheer anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
it would be, you'd have to get that in line and get it done. I don't know how long one of those would take to do.
It ain't gonna be
I
by
couldn't
May.
venture
I'll
a
tell you.
guess.
No.
It won't be by the time we have to
They
adopt
won't
the
have
budget.
16 other projects going, but
Right. I'll just have to check with GMB to see if they know anybody or if they, by chance, might be able to do it. I don't think they do that kind of thing, but they might.
They might know somebody.
They would probably know somebody.
What are ramifications of making an adjustment to the
amend the budget later.
no, like prior to May, this cycle, and taking down the, I'm going to say the true up account. I'm calling it the wrong thing.
The
Transfer.
Transfer account, yeah.
Well, if we keep, correct me if I'm wrong, if we keep the numbers as they are for this current fiscal year and use it for 24, is there a need to reduce that transfer?
probably. But it depends on whether you agree with you feel that the reserves are double counted in my figures. If you feel that reserves are double counted, then maybe not.
So yeah, at least from the current one and you know, going to 295 on the water side and 563 on the sewer side. I think, I mean, last year we put 66,000 in. I think we can at least do that for this year, if not more, and still be under the.
You say increase.
Well, again, that, we can't necessarily, the way this budget is set up, we can't designate a specific amount.
I got you.
It's the balance of the revenue in and the expenditure out that determines that number. If we take a flat rate number, then you're not gonna have a balanced budget.
Correct. It'll be whatever that number. I mean, that number is 0 right now because
Yeah, I'm waiting to.
But once we figure that out, I think.
Well, you would do, I mean, that number is 0 now, but if you said, hey, we want to get that number from 66 to 60, wouldn't you adjust other line items?
Budget's not complete yet, so.
No, I got you.
It's 98% of the line items are complete. Really,
I guess what I'm asking is it would require, if that line item is used to balance the budget, if you say that number should not go over, and I'm saying $60,000, and that's what we plug in there, you would then have to go back to adjust other items in the budget.
we would have to add a line item into, I don't know what you'd have to add a line item to compensate for that additional, or that other part of that number to go towards whatever, towards, I don't know how you would even do it.
And
I'd have to
for
think
this,
about that.
for this budget at least, there's at least $50,000 more in the 3 Rs. So in that sense, you would just add, say there's 10,000 extra, you would add that to probably the 3 Rs. You
Right.
could put it somewhere else
Okay.
if you
All
want.
right, yeah. I
Yeah,
see
you'd
what
have
you're
to,
saying.
you'd have to split it to another line
Right,
item or
right.
create a new one and designate it for something specific towards, but that's probably as good of a way to do it, is in the 3 Rs. If it were to go right now, I'm trying to give you a number here, bear with me, to that transfer number for the general fund would be, as it stands now, as it stands right now, there's 128,137 more revenue than expenses in the general fund. And then on the sewer side, water and sewer side or enterprise side, that number is 217, almost 218, which then you would in
More
turn.
revenue?
More, right now, more revenue than expenditure, as the budget sits right now.
I'm sorry, you said
128.
128 plus 218?
Let me go back up to, 128, and
That's double of what we put in last year.
218, just about.
346, and then that,
I'm sorry.
346
If you
total.
add. Total, yeah, I don't know what that total is, but.
And with that number, we could even pay off the sewer loans and then.
Well, let's talk about paying off sewer loan. When the sewer debt is the number that we have in there, that 71,000 or 75,000 is a yearly payment. To pay off those 2 loans is nearly $1 million of enterprise money that we don't have. Okay, so I just want to make that clear.
That's
Yeah,
the
it sounds
payment.
great and
That's
it
the payment.
would work, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's not going to completely reduce that deficit.
Okay.
So you see 71,000 or 75,000 a year, that doesn't seem so bad, but when you look at the total due on those 2 loans, and the 2 loans, I'll tell you right now on the sewer side, are the wastewater plant from 12 years ago or 11 years ago and Cohen Main pump stations upgrade in 2000, I think it was 15 or 16, or when they were done. But to pay those two loans off is about $960,000, $70,000.
Say $1 million to.
$1 million. So, just wanted to make that point, that's all. I'm still kind of boggled by the fact that we have that much left over, having lost $216,000 of area connection charge, which was just based on 12 EDUs, or 12 new homes a year, which is gone.
Can I just ask a quick question here? You know, when you're saying on those loans that it's a yearly payment?
71,000.
Well, I mean, don't you save a lot on interest if you pay it off monthly and then that
interest
amount
is
is going
almost-
down?
It's usually, what, annual or biannual?
Yeah,
It's
you
pretty
pay it
low
twice a
interest.
year.
Oh, okay.
Because they're government.
They're government loans, they're low interest loans.
And we technically do have the money to pay off those loans if you
It-
went that route again, but it's not gonna,
That would wipe our.
That would put a big dent in our
in our
enterprise
development
fund.
fund. Currently, there's 2.6, so it would break you down to 1.6.
Got a lot of projects.
Yeah, how many millions in projects do we have? So,
I've given you guys that list.
I know.
It's 18 to 20 million.
it was a
However you shake it
rhetorical
out.
question.
Right.
It's equivalent to putting extra $1,000 down on a car payment on a $30,000 car. You're really not saving, you're saving like $3 or $5 a month.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to get across is I'm not saying that we eliminate our reserves. I'm not saying that we
Yeah.
do anything crazy like that. I think that we can lower some rates and still be healthy and not have to worry. And those water numbers too could also change. Different projects that we're exploring and things like that. It could end up being cheaper. So there's still a lot of pieces in the mix that are just unknown.
Yeah.
So, back to the revenues on the enterprise side. Again, we're showing no sewer hookups, which is a big loss, I said, and we show a net loss of revenue of just under $100,000 in the enterprise. So, but the numbers, the usage calculations that are based again on FY23 are and the total ED, the build out of all the houses is about 109,000 increase there. So it offsets that by roughly 100,000. So.
Enough to digest for one night?
Do we have anything else for Jean, or we could cut her loose?
You have these. If I have any other questions after tonight, I'll just email you.
I won't be back in the office till Friday.
Okay. It'll be next week anyway, for me.
Hey, Gene, before you leave, how big is Snow Hill?
Right around 2,000 people.
About the same.
Yeah.
Similar situation, you know, I mean, you kind of used them as a model, I guess, or not a model, but just,
No.
not a model, but.
We do not
Comparison.
emulate them. They are about $500,000 in the hole on the wastewater
Oh,
side,
okay.
and almost $200,000 in the hole on the water side. And I didn't invent their figures either, so.
Yeah.
They're charging way less than they should have been for many, many, many years, and supplementing it out of the general fund. They have no reserves.
No, you don't.
I think that's a problem a lot of places.
Come some unhappy constituents coming up.
And that's the reason I automatically put reserves.
I want to go to that meeting too.
Because of that. Yeah, I'm probably gonna get my head handed to me next week.
Well, we weren't.
Nobody likes the messenger, you know, it's.
Well, you
But
know,
there's some-
that
there's-
particular case, that's the town where I grew up, and I'm also a ratepayer there, so.
So you know your bill's going up.
They,
Neighbor's not gonna like
they
you.
have not been cost effective for at least 5 years, if not longer. and even, what the heck, you know, $300,000 from the general fund or whatever it took.
With a motion to pay it back one day. Yep,
I owe you.
which never happens.
Yeah, exactly. And even their accountant and auditor has, and I'm talking out of school, but their auditor has even said, you know,
Yeah.
you can't keep doing this, folks. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gene.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gene.
Thank you for
care.
thank you for
Coming.
being in the cab.
What?
We have recycled. You leave it here.
Bye-bye.
Drive safe.
Oh, in here. Actually, there's one right outside.
So it seems to me that we have to adopt something. Whether it be, and I'm not trying to make the motion or anything here, but we are at the end of our current adopted rate schedule. So we have to adopt some form of moving forward that will take us to the next step here. So whether it's maintaining the rate, the same rates, both user and base rate and user rate for FY24, and then determine what we want to do. Are we doing that for 1 year? Are we doing it for 2 years? And then what are we doing for the next, after that time?
You mean for fiscal year 24, keep it the same as fiscal year 23? Or bump it up like we had been for the past, how many years? 7, 8, whatever.
Do the increase?
$2 and,
Well, if I remember correctly, it was a 3% increase on both.
right. Well, the base rate is, no, the 3% is on the usage.
The usage, the base rates.
The base rate is $2 and, what is it, $3? Whatever it is now, wait a minute. So $10 on sewer and $2 on water, right? Yeah,
No, 10 on sewer.
right, and 2 on water, yeah.
Correct.
So.
That was from 22 to 23.
Right,
Yeah.
well, it was we did change, no, it was
What?
from fiscal year 19, basically, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a change.
We amended it,
You amended it in between. So the current basically was redone again from 20 to 23.
right,
So yeah, 23's numbers are what Gene had said for
Right.
sewer. It's 135 base rate and 888 per thousand. And then on the water is 137 base rate and 435 on the usage. And that's what I have. That's what I have in there now.
You have the same.
I can change that and literally, you tell me what numbers you want
Oh,
in
I know.
there, and I can put it in there, and it's done.
I would recommend either we keep it the same as fiscal year 23, or we bump it up the way we had been for the last 5 years.
I would recommend keeping it the same way, based on the fact that we have 300 and change thousand in
Revenue.
In revenue, I think it's healthy to do that, assuming that we're going to do a study to get a more accurate rate and see if we might even be able to lower the rates.
Well, plus they are going around and putting new meters in. I know. I'm a little scared. We just got a new meter. And I'm thinking, what's it going to do? But I know that they are. How many new meters have been put in, Kalina? Do you know?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
It's been less than.
Wayne, do you know how much? If you're still there, he's on, but he might not be. I do know that they have replaced them, and
It's
Wayne.
been once a week for a little bit now, so we've been replacing quite a few.
Mine was replaced.
So I would say somewhere around 15 or more.
Just in the last couple weeks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just in the last couple weeks.
But increase wise, you haven't heard any like major increases, nothing like people are.
Probably hasn't hit the bills.
Too soon, probably, right?
Well, I mean, I'm
No,
sure that
I
he's
mean,
done.
It's been like in halfway through this cycle,
It
so
has
I
been.
mean, they're not
Did he
even
do
gonna
any
have.
I was gonna say,
like,
did he
there's
do
been
any maybe like a
some
year ago or
there's
something?
been-
Maybe.
Yes, so we've done several over the last year. And to be honest with you, I would say on average maybe $20 to $50 a quarter difference, if that. But it's significant when you're talking about 350 times that amount. You know, that's quite a bit a year of captured revenue. Yeah, I think the immediate concern though was Ken Lieberman actually asked like how much of an impact would it be to one user, and it doesn't seem like that's a huge impact when you consider the full base rate. Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of holding the rates for this next year, seeing what transpires between improvements that Wayne and crew are making and new users coming online to see if we can knock out any deficit and then take another look at it, you know, if we need to do something.
Maybe get the study done if we can find an affordable way to do it. I feel like there's too many variables. I feel like, you know, right now, I don't really, it seems to me we're gonna be okay for the next year. So I don't see any reason to change anything at this point. Let's just learn more and go from there. Might be a totally different conversation a year from now.
All right?
I'll just add too, not that you're saying this, Gary, but one thing I wanted to be cognizant of is that we didn't kick anything down the road.
No.
I do think we are doing something about it. It's just, we're not changing the rate, which I don't think would be a prudent thing to do at this point, because I feel like they're just, like everybody said, it's just too many questions. But I do think we are taking steps in the right direction, because, you know, maybe it's ambitious to think that we could do all three in the next 300 in the next 2 years, but is 50 in the next year?
Yeah, I think 350 between the
75.
water line project, what Public Works can do.
350, oh, in the next
There's
year?
about I'm just saying, there's about 350 that need replaced.
Sure.
Right. So I think between the combination, I don't think it's realistic or even possible for Public Works to do that itself.
No.
I think they're going to be able to do some. The water line will take care of those along that line. But I do believe if you want to do an aggressive meter replacement in a short amount of time, you need a plumbing contractor involved.
Right.
To get in and do that in conjunction. And with
I did get a price from one plumbing contractor,
Anywhere from $250 to $275 a meter to replace it would be their cost.
What was that again, Wayne?
$250 to $275 per meter if they replaced it.
Plus the cost of the meter.
It's about 3 to 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, 3/4 inch meters are about $193, I believe, or $195, and 1 inch meters are $235. And primarily in Old Town, Atlee Ridge and Blue Ridge, they're all 3/4 inch meters. So the lower cost meters are used there.
Yeah, so you're already at 75 on the 90 plus the material.
Yeah, but even if we only do 100, it's
Sure.
still going to be percentage-wise pretty. I mean, at least definitely better than what we're doing
I ran
now.
100 meters with paying a contractor, a plumbing contractor to do, plus the price of the meter, and it's about $47.5 for 100 meters.
Right, $500 a pop.
Right.
Yeah.
Which it's $20 a quarter extra bill. That's 5 years to pay that cost off. And
If
then
we do it through a
what are,
contract.
what are the new meters guaranteed for? Are we gonna be in that same position? They're 10 years again?
Well,
meters?
she-
2025.
20 to 25.
The new ones will last 25?
Yeah, her
Okay.
numbers are
Yes.
very, very conservative when she says 10.
Okay,
That,
all right,
all the meters are
good, okay.
18 to 25-year range.
I think if you did it every 10 years, it'd probably be a wash.
Yeah.
By the time you,
Yeah.
bigger systems, by the time you start at one end and get to the other end, it takes you a couple years, you're starting over again.
Right.
That's the way Sykes
Sure,
Central's 10,000.
always doing it, yeah, yeah.
You know, so you look at
Well, how many meters will be put in because of the water main project?
75,
75, okay.
77.
77.
So they're all paid for and will be going in. So that's 75 of that 350 that we'll take care of.
And even if it takes, like I said, even if it takes Public Works 3 years to do it,
Sure.
the cost is a lot lower, and then B, every year you're in a 40%, 60%, 80%, your cost savings is going to outweigh it.
So is the meters that they're putting in with the water main project gonna supersede the meter that was just installed in my house?
Your meter-
That's correct, Sharon. Your meter that was installed in your house is a 3/4. Your new meter will be a 1-inch. We'll be able to reuse that meter at another location though.
Oh,
Yeah, there's different, inside meters are smaller than vaults all along. They're the bigger meters.
And realistically, all meters should be in vaults. I would
Ideally.
recommend.
Yeah. Anything done new, Snyders, reserves, they're all outside meters. Wayne, is Atlee and Blue Ridge, are they all inside or are they meter vaults?
Inside.
They're all inside.
That was before they.
30 years ago,
30 years now.
yeah,
Yeah.
Reserve, I guess, was probably the first.
yeah.
That went with the vaults. And then we have sporadically some that we
Yeah.
put vaults in.
Yeah.
Like Donna has a vault, for instance.
Yeah.
College and Blue Ridge.
Yeah, when we did that over, right?
Did they have vaults?
Didn't they get
had
vaults? I think they did.
During the replacement.
Yeah. They got vaults.
All right?
So we'll I guess officially need some motion. It doesn't have to be tonight, but what we want to do with that moving forward. If we're going to hold for 1 year and then reevaluate, or hold for 2 years, reevaluate, hold for a year, and raise whatever you guys want to do. It's just we're going to have to do it officially in a resolution or an ordinance, I believe.
We could do that at the next council meeting. That way, at least Michelle could take a look at it and see
Yeah.
if we need to print out a form or anything.
All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Gary, on behalf of the council and the town, our deepest sympathy.
Thank you. Appreciate it. His services aren't going to be till next, not this week, it'll be next weekend.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, well, they can hear.
Our prayers and thoughts are with you.
We're looking pretty good, Dana, right, on our budget? I know this isn't really the time when we can talk about it on Monday, I guess it is, Monday's the 20th?
It's a week from
Yeah.
when.
But if we want to, I presented it to you about that part-time position. It's in the calculations. So you guys wanted to digest that a little bit. So think about that. I would like to get a yes or a no on that, so then we can truly, I
Right.
think, finalize this budget, and because then we have to get it to. Well, we got to get it advertised for the public hearing and all that, and then the tax rate's due to the county by May 19th, I think it is.
We don't have a meeting it's not next week, it's two.
No.
And work session's.
20th.
20th, yeah, yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Your motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So carried.
Recording
Second was Dave.